Hi, I'm Dr. Anna Baranowsky, and this is all about post-traumatic growth and recovery. I am thrilled because I have Dr. Jonice Webb with me today. We've done several interviews before, and she's doing some very remarkable work with childhood emotional neglect. And I am really happy because I spent some time looking again at running on empty, overcoming your childhood emotional neglect. You can see it's earmarked. But what I'm really excited about is your new book. This came out just recently, and it's actually dated 2018, so we know how fresh it is because today it's December the 13th, 2017, and this is 2018. And this one's really interesting because it's running on empty no more, and it's transform your relationships with your partner, your parents, and your children. And I am finding it a very profound partner for this book. So I would actually say that people could get a lot out of reading both of the books together because one does an excellent job of laying a foundation of understanding about what happens to an individual when they've experienced childhood emotional neglect in their lives growing up. And this one does this great job of explaining, as we move forward in our lives, what happens to us, what happens to our relationships, and doing the kind of trauma work that I do and recognizing how devastating life can be without healthy relationships. I just think you're making a massive contribution with this work, and I first want to just thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your saying that. It has been a very rewarding process for me, and I hear from people, all the time about how much it's helping them and make a difference for them. So it's an incredible journey for me.
And people are emailing you or calling you. How are they reaching out to you, Johnny?
I get a lot of emails. I'm doing a book club for people who, once they purchase the second book, they can send me questions and I answer them on a book club. We're in week 3 of it now, but that's had a really great response. So pretty much everything I do, I just feel like I'm touching a real need in the world today, and that feels very gratifying to me.
Oh, that's just really lovely. Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about this whole idea of, leaning into the place where people are feeling that wound and understanding that when we start to come from a place of kindness and generosity with ourselves and also the people around us, it just opens up the possibility of us evolving to be people who can make a difference in the world, and that anger and violence isn't the answer.
Yes, couldn't agree more. I think so much of the world moving forward has to do with all of us paying more attention to that source that's wired into us, our emotions, our own emotions and other people's emotions, and dealing with them instead of pretending they don't exist, which is done all too often in today's world.
Yeah. I think that when a world is driven by survival, there's not as much space as we have today. I mean, we do live in a relatively privileged world that allows us to have enough energy to push along this question of what emotions can actually teach us and how they can be the leaders in helping us become the best that we can be.
Yeah, I think our emotions are are the deepest expression of who we truly are as individuals and as humans. And so the closer we live to that place in us, the more we can thrive and connect with each other.
And I love what you say, because some people find that actually very difficult. There's some people who find emotions of sadness unacceptable, and other people who find emotions of anger unacceptable. So, when you say that, I do agree. And yet I know how difficult it can be for somebody who has not even found a way to sit with any comfort at all with the particular emotions that they find unacceptable, deplorable, or that they repel against.
Yes, yes. Well, I think that it's amazing how much it helps to learn the emotion skills. And, and this is what I talk about in both of my books, but especially in the second one, actually both of them a lot, about how once you start to try to work on this, it is very possible to learn how to tolerate emotions that felt intolerable before. Because once you know what to do with the emotion that you're having, then it sets you on a whole different path. And then you can start listening to the message of the emotion. You can start managing that feeling. You can try to figure out if there's an action that you should take that the feeling is telling you. And it just opens up a whole new world where you're living closer to your heart, and you're living closer to the hearts of people that you're with or who are important to you. And that's what life is all about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's not so much that we won't have emotion and then, we just go through life and say, okay, it'll be okay, but that when we have our emotion, we have a landing place for it, we have a way of navigating it and softening around it, as opposed to just recoiling against it. I want to read a really lovely, lovely, lovely quote that you have in the book. And that this one is actually from your second book, Running on Empty No More. And here you say, when emotional intimacy is not fully developed in your relationship, it can lead to emptiness and a loneliness that is far more painful than you would feel if you were actually alone. And I think that does such a good job of laying kind of the trajectory forward into the meaning and what you unfold in your book. I wonder if you would talk to that and talk to how childhood emotional neglect leads people into this unfulfilled emotional intimacy.
Yeah, so if you grow up, so the definition of childhood emotional neglect is growing up in a household where your feelings are under responded to, possibly even ignored. And if your emotions growing up are not attended to enough, then the child receives the message to push all of his or her feelings down and away, and so that they don't bother other people, which works to get you through your childhood home. But then when you grow up, and especially when you enter into a relationship, a romantic relationship, you need those emotions to connect you to the other person. So if your emotions are pushed away, it ends up, or if you're married to someone who grew up this way, either way, there's a slice of something vital that's taken out of the relationship. And neither person usually understands what's missing, but both people just feel it. There's just something not quite connecting them that's supposed to be there. And so in this book, I talk about how what it looks like when two people who grew up with childhood emotional neglect marry or partner, and what it's like if one grew up that way and the other one didn't. And we follow these two different couples all the way through their lifespan, basically, through their healing and all the way, so that the reader can see what it's like to find yourself in a marriage like that, and how the people can sometimes be like, wake up and say, wait a minute, there's something seriously wrong here, there's something missing. And then what happens after that is just a process of reconnecting with emotions and welcoming them back into the relationship and making it a lot more rich and alive.
How common do you think this is, people who grew up in families where their emotions are neglected?
I think it's very, very common. And, I would say it's like a continuum where there are people who grew up in households that were so emotionally neglectful that they feel like they're literally defined by it. And then all the way down to people who had just, slightly under the threshold of what's enough, and everything in between. So I think it's a question, different people relate to it different amounts. Some people not at all, which is great. But I think that an awfully huge swath of the population falls in that continuum.
Right, and I see a lot of that as well. I have had a very interesting time with this second book, and I've been, reading these 3 parenting styles: the well-meaning but emotionally neglected, the struggling parent, or the self-involved parent. And there you have a look for list for each of them. And then you also have a look for list for emotionally healthy parents. And I'll tell you that, and doing a lot of the trauma work that I do, not one of the clients that I've been asking these questions to over the last couple of weeks says, oh yeah, I totally relate to the emotionally healthy. That makes total sense. But what does seem to happen is if I just read the list and say, just say yes or no to whichever items you want, and we identify which list they relate to more based on the number of yeses or nos. It's been a very interesting exercise, and I don't think that's the way you were planning to use the book, but it's been, I found to be very enlightening. Clients are walking away from the sessions feeling like they really understand something about themselves and how they were shaped as a result of just going through that little exercise.
Wow, that's fascinating. You are right. I never thought of a therapist using those questions like that, but I think it's a great idea.
And it has been very, very fruitful. So I'll give you an example. So on page 73 and 74, this is the well-meaning but neglected themselves parents. That's your top category, the first category. None of them are top. And what you're really saying here, and one of the big themes is that the individual walks away feeling like somehow they were flawed because it's hard for them to really recognize what it is that was missing. It's like the absence of the thing rather than the thing that had happened. And how confusing that must be.
It's so confusing, and I think this is the most confusing category of parents because these parents love their kids, they want what's best for them, they might provide everything materially, and so when the child grows up, that he looks back on his childhood and says, my parents were awesome, they were just great. So whatever I'm struggling with now it's got to be some flaw that I have. It's my own fault.
Yeah.
They just can't see their parents didn't respond to their emotions enough. It's not something they remember.
Yeah. It's the absence of the thing, not the thing, it's really interesting how that must play a terrible, it's kind of a burden that it would leave the individual because they're left with a big question. Let me just read through a couple of these because they're so interesting. And so this is the well-meaning parent look for list. You have love for your parents and are surprised by sudden anger you sometimes have towards them. You feel confused about your feelings about your parents. You feel guilty for being angry at them. Being with your parents is boring. Your parents don't see or know the real you or as you are today, and you know that your parents love you, but you don't necessarily feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That would have a pretty
That's
big
what
impact.
It feels. Yeah, and it is how it feels when you have that vacuum between you and your parents of emotional attunement. If it's not there enough, you end up feeling like a kind of a stranger with them, and you're very confused about your own feelings because they don't make any sense to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you haven't learned how to lean into them with some understanding that hasn't been modeled in any way, and yet it doesn't mean that the parents don't love them. So you would probably end up choosing a partner who might lack these skills as well. doesn't know how to attune to your emotions.
Yes, exactly. I see that so often
Hmm.
that two emotionally neglected people marry, and it's because that sort of unattuned love feels comfortable. It's what you grew up with, and it's what you seek and what you settle into.
I
And
would think a person would be left with a feeling like they're very, very hungry on some level. What do you think about that?
some people, yes, I think there is a level of emotional hunger at the base of every person who grew up with CEN. But if it's really, if some people are driven by that, and they tend to marry someone who is very emotional, right? Like who takes up all the emotional space, and that could be someone who tends towards narcissism, or someone who is really emotional in a healthy way. It just depends. It's that continuum again. But if the childhood emotional neglect is severe and deep enough, I think it definitely can drive a person to marry someone who has pathological extreme emotions of one kind or another.
That makes sense to me. Then the next one, is it okay if I just read the next one out? Because this
Absolutely.
is just I just found this part of the book so compelling. This is for the struggling parents. And your look for list. Oh, and one of the deepest issues here is a tendency to be excessive caretakers of others when you become an adult. So the look for list includes: you have great empathy toward your parents and a strong wish to help or take care of them. You're grateful for all your parents have done for you and can't understand why you sometimes feel an inexplicable anger toward them. You have excessive focus on taking care of other people's needs, often to your own detriment, and your parents are not harsh or emotionally injurious to you. So, this is this one is very troubling, because I see, and you've written, that children of struggling parents grow up to be self-sufficient in the extreme, which means they're really, there's a lack of space for surrounding themselves with people who can offer them as much as they offer the other people, right? Like a sharing of responsibility and care.
Yes, exactly. The thing about struggling parents is that they are they might, just like the well-meaning parents, they might love you, they might do their very best to take care of you. However, they are struggling financially, they're grieving the loss of a spouse or a divorce, or they have another child that has special needs to take care of, or a family member. They are just struggling financially or just to survive somehow themselves. So they end up not giving you enough of that emotional attunement and substance.
Right, and
And
it's, sorry. Mhm.
go ahead.
It seems to me that if you're like the good child would, work really hard to make it easier for their parents if they see that the parents are struggling. And I would imagine that behavior can start from a very young age.
Yes, it can. Because the child, yes, grows up feeling like they need to, fill the space and take care of these younger siblings, or take care of the parent. And it's just setting the child up to become a caretaker. The parent's not doing that on purpose at all,
Right. Mhm.
but it is the result.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, that's pretty serious stuff, right? The next one is the self-involved parent, and this one, you suggest that is easier for people to kind of understand and make sense of. And here are the look fors. You often feel anxious before seeing your parents. You often find yourself hurt when you're with your parents. It's not unusual for you to get physically sick right before, during, or after seeing your parents. You have significant anger at your parents. Your relationship with them feels false or fake. It's hard to predict whether your parents will behave in a loving or rejecting way toward you from one moment to the next. And sometimes your parents seem to be playing games with you, or manipulating you, or maybe even trying to purposely hurt you.
Yeah.
Oh.
So these are the parents who are either narcissistic, so they're taken up by their own needs and they see the child as a way to fulfill their own needs, or a sociopath, and there are many more sociopaths around than people realize. I'm sure you've probably found this in your own practice, that sociopaths really are all about manipulation and control and getting their way. And they will mistreat their children as much as it takes to get whatever it is that they want. And of course, that does all kinds of damage to the child. It could also be an addicted parent who is in the addict mode and, mistreating the child in that way. So these kinds of parents do more than just emotionally neglect. They also damage the child emotionally. It's not damage that can't be reversed, but nevertheless, it's sort of a different type of emotional neglect. It's paired with some emotional abuse, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And this one's very interesting because it really is set apart from the other two, because in the other two there's this element of love but a lack of skill, whereas this one, it almost seems that their love is so self-serving that they don't even recognize or they don't care when the children are being harmed by their bad behavior.
Yes, exactly. And the one saving grace of children who grow up this way, they usually can look back and remember and think, this is why I'm struggling the way I am. I have an explanation. It's because my parents literally mistreated me. So having the advantage of being able to remember it seems very slim indeed, like a very small advantage. I hate to even call it that, but it does help to be able to see what went wrong in a way that the other two categories often can't.
Then they can recognize this is not my fault and it's okay for me to use different skills than what they had.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
So those are really remarkable. And then you do this incredible thing in your book. You write about the contrast, the emotionally healthy parent. And as I had said before, I've been going through this book with a number of people, just those categories. And when I get to the emotionally healthy parent, I get this really startling response. And this is kind of across the board. Nobody, not one of my clients, nobody I've shared this with has said to me, oh, wow, that list? Oh, those are my parents. So let me read this list. And this one is really about really attuned parents, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Look forward to seeing your parents and sometimes find yourself feeling good and even restored afterward. The emotions you feel toward your parents are much like the feelings you have in the rest of your relationships, varied and usually understandable. You feel that your parents know and understand you. If this feeling is disrupted occasionally during conflicts, it does return afterward. You not only know that your parents love you, you feel that love from them. Now, these are people who grow up feeling that they are being seen, known, and understood and approved by the parents. They've got a connected, meaningful relationship.
Yes. Yep.
It's such
having a relationship like that with one's parents it just sets the child up with a springboard for all sorts of forward movement in the child's life. And that child doesn't need to be reading my books. Right?
Unless they're a therapist who's curious about this whole issue.
Yeah.
Or if somebody who's in the helping profession, or maybe somebody who married somebody with SEN.
Yes, absolutely. Yep, that's what I was about to say.
Okay, all right, yeah, because how common do you think that is? Growing up in a home where your parents are really attuned.
I think it's getting greater and greater as we learn more. There's more research about emotion happening, and we're understanding its value and why human beings are wired with it. And the more we learn, the more we understand, the more people are talking about it and writing about it and reading about it. And I think we're moving in that direction. So I like to think it's the majority.
It really resonates a lot with the new self-compassion research as well, which I know you touch on a little bit in your book too. Just this whole idea that we can lean in with a lot of kindness towards ourselves, and that that can create a world of kind of kindness and tolerance in our lives and amongst the people that we relate to.
Yeah, one of the very common qualities of people with CEN is that they are very hard on themselves. And I think it's because they end up developing this harsh voice towards themselves as a child, because there's no adult voice talking them through mistakes and helping them understand themselves and forgive themselves and move forward from things that happen. And so the child ends up being very hard on him or herself. And learning how to talk yourself through situations and forgive yourself for your mistakes and learn from them and move on and treat yourself with the care that you didn't get as a child is one of the key parts of healing from childhood emotional neglect.
Nice. Yeah, I think that one of the pieces of this conversation that stands out for me is that children, whatever their circumstances are growing up, they're really wired for survival. And the things that they do to get through a difficult thing in their childhood, they could carry into their adult relationships. And, that's the place where they can use their wisdom that they've learned over the years to start to upgrade their operating system in a way so that they can choose new skills, use new resources, so that they can actually have the kind of meaningful relationships both with themselves and others.
Couldn't agree more. And, people amaze me every single day in how much they can take steps forward and change themselves and, correct what went wrong for them. I think anyone who has the will and really wants to do it and is willing to put in the time and the effort and persevere can do it. I really believe that.
I love that you say that. That makes me so happy. It's like, it's such a nice thing that you've recognized. Like, when you really recognize this issue, I think it opens a doorway for people to say, this is the thing. This is the thing. And now they can lean in and find strategies that really feel correctly aligned with moving in a direction to address that very problematic infrastructure, what was missing.
Yeah, they don't even have to find the strategies. I'll give them to them because I've walked so many people through this that I've found a series of steps that you can go through, and it really does make a difference in your life if you take those steps.
So let's hear about that, those steps. I know you cover a lot of that. There are 4 skill sets that you cover in your book. Can you walk us through some of that so we can have a better idea of what you do?
Yes, absolutely. It's a process of beginning to break down the wall that is blocking off your feelings, and there are ways to do that involve imagery, and also it's amazing how much difference it makes if you just start to pay attention to what you're feeling. You start to have more feelings, and also beginning to learn emotion skills like how to put words to emotions. Just increasing your emotion vocabulary can make a huge difference. So beginning to learn the skills of how to sit with an emotion, how to interpret it, name it, how to decide what to do with it, and then how to deal with it in a way that is you taking control of that feeling instead of letting the feeling control you, which it always does when it's behind that wall. As soon as you pull it out from the wall and you start to work with it, then you're in charge. And And then the next step really is the reason I wrote this second book. It's how to take learning how to take your own emotions and use them in your relationships with other people, and start to pay attention to what other people are feeling. Start speaking up for yourself more, expressing your own needs, and paying more attention to your own wishes and what you enjoy and what you want, and expressing that. It's all connected, and it just happens. It sort of kind of flows naturally once you realize what's wrong, and you decide to take it on. You can do all those things.
I would imagine that people really need help with the navigation, because they will be feeling more things that they're not used to feeling, and also the people in their lives will be confronted with this new feeling human being that maybe in the past wasn't showing much emotion or much need to show emotion. So how do you address that?
Yeah, I mean, I always say if people in your life are looking surprised by you, that means that you're doing a really good job. And some people even tell me that their partners, or people, their friends, say, what's up with you? You're different. And it's not always a positive response, because people are affected and they're confused. They're like, wait, what? You just said something I've never heard you say before. But so I tell people, recognize that that's a positive thing, and it means that you're moving forward. And also just people that are close to you, it's good to tell them about this and explain to them what you're working on, and that you are trying to be different. If just the simple words, I'm trying to speak up for myself more, you don't even have to explain the whole story unless you want to, but just giving them a little explanation can really make a difference. But you just got to keep doing it and not give up.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of people who would be very interested if their family members or friends or colleagues started to mention scent, because as we discussed before, I think it's pretty common. This is quite remarkable. What you've done is such a big contribution, Jonice, and I just wanted to really thank you. Is there anything else that you think our listeners would be interested in hearing before we sign off today?
Sure. If someone who's watching is wondering if maybe they have this going on in their lives, they can go to my website and take the Childhood Emotional Neglect Questionnaire, which I designed for this very purpose, because it's so hard to remember it. And once you take that questionnaire, then you'll receive my newsletter, which just gives more and more information about CEN, how it happens, what it feels like, and how to heal it.
Thanks for making that resource available. We'll make sure that we put the link attached to the YouTube video or on the YouTube channel so people can find it, because I know that it will be of interest to many people. I just want to thank you again, Jonice, and I just want to wrap up by saying if anybody's interested in either of these remarkable books, they are now both available. And I think they go perfectly well hand in hand. I think once you read Running on Empty, Overcoming Childhood Emotional Neglect, the next logical step is the relationship piece. And I think you've done this remarkable job of explaining that in the second book. And I really think what you've done with those 3 parenting styles, the well-meaning but emotionally neglected, the struggling parent, the self-involved parent, and then the contrast, emotionally healthy parent, and the look-for lists are definitely one of my favorites in the book. And your skill sets to take people from being what looks to me like emotionally frozen, or trying their best to navigate the difficulties of childhood, to defrosting and into genuine relationships is just beautiful, beautiful work in terms of the evolution of who we can really be as a human species, leaning into the place of really respecting ourselves and the people who are around us. What a revolution that would be.
Yes.
So thank you once again for your time, Jonice, and the work that you're doing. and wishing you and everybody out there a gentle day.